This here is going to be interesting. My video on the Sigma 18-50 brought a lot of viewers to this channel, but today we're looking at the second option, the Tamron 17-70 f2.8. Now, personally, I think this lens has a lot of good things going for it, and dare I say it's a better option for a lot of videographers shooting on APS-C. This is my lens, and I've owned it for about 2 years, so what I'm about to share in this video is based on my user experience over the course of that time. Let's figure out what's so special about this lens. So, coming in at around $699 USD, we've got a weather seal lens with a range that's kind of perfect for your typical run and gun shooter. There's also optical image stabilization, which really helps with both stills and video, even if your camera has a stabilized sensor. Now, the range and the optical stabilization makes this lens just a tiny bit longer and bigger than your average APS-C zoom, but if we were to compare it to something like full frame 24-70, it's still pretty compact and lightweight. As a matter of fact, you won't run into any problems if you want to fly this lens on a gimbal. Here I'm testing it on the Weebill S with my Sony FX30. And it doesn't make a difference with the barrel extended or retracted. Some people have been unhappy with the optical stabilization of this lens, which together with IBIS and especially electronic stabilization on top of that, tends to become quite sticky. So I wouldn't recommend using active steady shot with this lens, but rather stick with standard IBIS if your camera has a stabilized sensor. Like most mechanical stabilization, you have to kind of develop a feel for just how much you're able to push it before you start seeing any artifacts. Whether that's wobbles like we see on the Canon cameras or jerkiness or what have you, there's kind of a limit and you have to kind of figure things out as you go along. I personally learned a lot about this when I first bought my Fujifilm X-T4, which in the beginning had a super duper choppy IBIS back in the early days. And in the end, unless you're shooting on Panasonic, there's no better option than using a gimbal if smooth footage is the ultimate goal. Now, let's talk about focus, and I do apologize in advance for the amount of information in this section, but to video shooters especially, focus performance of a lens is really important. So first of all, this lens actually have a pretty impressive minimal focus distance, which in my opinion kind of adds to its versatility as a run and gun lens. Whether it's for product shots or insets of the ring, if you're a wedding shooter, that sort of stuff, this lens allows you to get an enormously wide variety of coverage. The autofocus during the 2 years that I've used this lens have always felt very reliable and solid. I've not seen much in the way of focus breathing, that sort of stuff, which is obviously another important feature for us videographers, but also for still shooters, obviously doing things like focus and exposure stacking. And I've never really run into any problems or heard the autofocus motor being picked up by the internal microphones, that sort of stuff. Then again, I'm not relying or using the built-in microphones if I'm recording audio, but just for safety, here's a little sample for you so you can hear for yourself. But one thing to keep in mind when it comes to autofocus is this lens, along with most other photography zooms, isn't parfocal. Not being parfocal is what's causing the lens to often lose focus on your subject just for a split second before it kind of picks it back up again when you're zooming in and out, especially if you're doing fast like crash type zooms. On the 17-70, it's going to be most noticeable if you start your zoom from the absolute widest end. But if we were to start at 20mm instead of 17, the autofocus usually keeps up pretty well. Another chapter in this never-ending focus odyssey is obviously the manual focus experience. Now, if you've seen my comparison video with the Sigma 18-50, then you kind of know what I'm talking about. Manual focusing is actually crucial for a lot of shooters, and this here is another area where the Tamron, in my opinion, is a much better alternative compared to the Sigma, where the autofocus wheel is kind of tucked away here all the way at the back next to the mount, and it's kind of recessed into the lens barrel, so it's difficult to feel and grab, especially if you're using gloves, that sort of stuff. So in that sense, the Tamron is a much better and more pleasant experience for all of you manual focus shooters out there. And just a little side note here, both of these lenses, the Sigma and the Tamron, have the focus wheel here at the back instead of at the front, which is more common when it comes to zoom lenses. But yeah, I digress. Now, let's talk about image quality, optical performance, that sort of stuff. Now, just want to say that I have done pretty extensive testing in that other video, the comparison video, so I won't go super deep into details in this one, but to kind of summarize the optical performance, I think it's nice and sharp, and it's probably sharp enough for most shooters. In fact, I actually find it to be too sharp a lot of times when I'm going for a more narrative or more cinematic look. Chromatic aberration, flaring, that sort of stuff isn't really something that I've noticed from the footage that I've shot with this lens. In fact, I kind of had to go out here last night to do some safety checks and shoot some against the street light here just to check out the flaring, that sort of stuff. And to me, these are perfectly acceptable results, especially for a 699 zoom lens. So if we were to boil everything down to just one bite, or maybe 2 or 3 bites, the Tamron 17-70 is actually a pretty fantastic lens that covers a lot of areas and does a lot of things really well, and some other things at least more than well enough. For the right shooters, I really think the large size is more of a pro than a con, as it kind of improves the overall ergonomics of your rig, and it also offers a more solid point of contact for all of you handheld shooters. The range and the constant f2.8 aperture are other important features to a lot of people who want a blurry background for artistic reasons, and for all of those people running and gunning, often dealing with uncontrolled lighting environments where a 2.8 lens usually trumps an f4 lens like the Sony 18-105, and maybe even the Sigma if it comes to doing manual focus while you're at it. And just to clarify the butter, I'm not here to badmouth the Sigma 18-50. I think it's a great lens for a lot of shooters, especially those who really value and prioritize size over things like weather sealing, ergonomics, manual focus control, to name a few things that I think is important to most run and gun dog shooters, on the other hand. I'm gonna leave the link to that comparison video up on the screen here at the end of this video, along with my review of the Sigma 18-50 for those of you who wants to dig a little deeper if you haven't decided yet. And if you want to join the after party, I've put some tasty links down below in the description to all of the available mount options for the 17-70, and I'm gonna put some links to the Sigma 18-50 as well, so you can kind of compare pricing and all that fun stuff. Now, wait a minute, did we just skip Bokeh altogether? Okay, so here's my 10-second Bokeh resume, if you will. So it's not going to be the smoothest Bokeh you've ever seen, and it's probably not going to win any awards at the International Bokeh Festival, that sort of stuff. But it's fine, you know, it's not too bad. I don't like it, I don't hate it. It's okay, especially for $6.99 lens once again. But yeah, that's gonna be it. So toodaloo.